Hey, I'm Michael Yadrick, and I'm broadcasting from Tacoma, Washington, aka Grit City, and the native land of the Puyallup tribe and Stilican people. This is Tree Hugger Podcast, the show where we reimagine ecological restoration, and the episode where we discuss restoration for kids, seed balls, STEM inclusion, and a whole bunch of other things. My guest on this show is Dr. Elies Gornish, who's a Cooperative Extension Specialist in Ecological Restoration at the University of Arizona. Her research and outreach program largely focuses on identifying strategies for successful restoration in arid land systems and integration of restoration approaches into weed management. Originally from New York, Dr. Gornish received her MS and PhD from Florida State University in 2013. She then completed 2 years of a postdoc at the University of California, Davis. Dr. Gornish is an early career leader in the fields of arid land restoration and weed management and has published over 60 papers. In addition to vegetation management, Dr. Gornish is passionate about STEM inclusion and in 2018 became the director of University of Arizona GALS, which stands for Girls on Outdoor Adventure for Leadership and Science. This new program focuses on providing science, learning, and leadership opportunities to traditionally underserved female high school students through backcountry programming. I'm so glad to bring you this show with Dr. Gornish. She's been on my list of people to interview for a while now. So I'm really happy to share this conversation with you. It starts right here. Super. I just turned all the fans and air conditioning off. We're having a heat wave.
You guys, wait, you're in Tacoma?
I'm in Tacoma, Washington. We're not used to this 90-degree weather.
That can be a lot.
You know, it's warm. I just put my shirt back on so it could be presentable.
Thanks. You're like, I'm not wearing pants, but that's cool.
Yeah. So we're trying to cool off, but the dogs are like all flopped out.
I bet.
Everything. Yeah, it's pretty warm for us.
My kid, she was born here in Tucson, and if it's like below 92 degrees, she's like, Mommy, I'm cold.
I'm putting my puffy jacket on.
When there's monsoons here, it can actually reach like 86 degrees, which is, and we will get in the car and she'll be like, Mommy, turn on the heat. And I'm like, you're insane.
Yeah.
It's
like,
crazy.
Turn on the seat warmers.
Yeah. She's like, it's cold. I'm like, oh God.
Yeah. My son's 11 and he's just like, I think he was a little dehydrated yesterday. Mm-hmm. So we're all a little grumpy.
We're like, why does everything hurt in my head?
Yeah, last night he's like, I have a headache. I feel sick to my stomach.
You need some water, dude.
Yeah, I know. I think they were like jumping on the trampoline at his buddy's house or something like all day. So, and then went to the pool. So I just think he's dehydrated. Well, it's awesome. Thank you for accepting the invitation. You've actually been on my list for a while.
Oh, cool.
Honestly, I'm a podcast fan in addition to being a podcast host. Mm-hmm. So like a couple years ago, obviously I am interested in seed-based restoration. And I remember I just like went in my podcast app and like typed in some things. I don't know. Maybe it was seed balls. I don't know. Yeah. But your name came up and it was like an urban farmer podcast, I believe. Urban farmer. I just re-listened to it yesterday. And subsequently, you inspired me. I did some seed balls.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And
how'd they turn out?
They're okay. I didn't do a lot.
That's cool.
Probably need to do more. Maybe I didn't print out, but I remember forwarding the instructions for the bike crank thing and around, but I don't know. It didn't get much traction, but that's a pun. Wow. I'm not used to do a lot of puns. Sorry.
Excellent work. That was great. Yeah, unless you're going to make like thousands of seed balls, a seed bike might be overkill for most people.
We might be. But this might re-inspire us to do some more because I have a ton of seed in my office right now.
Wait, so where do you work? What's your day job?
My day job is at the City of Seattle Parks and Recreation Department. I support Green Seattle Partnership, so we do urban forest restoration.
Oh, cool.
So often we have some areas that are sort of destined to be forests. Generally, we're trying to build like big forests like you would think in the Pacific Northwest. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of opportunities to do like kind of pollinator-friendly habitats. But then sometimes actually my biggest challenge is actually kind of revegetating the understory after we remove weeds, that have been there for decades. Yeah. So in the very shady, limiting conditions and after we've like dug or sprayed. So that's my biggest challenge.
It's also people like being under trees. And when you have people, and that's cool, but when you got people around, it's hard to get stuff to grow because,
I had like a couple photos on Instagram, I think, where I showed seed ball, like before and after picture. I don't know. It's not very interesting.
Oh, cool. No, I love those pictures.
Yeah.
Some people look like celebrity diet before and after. I'm big on like before and after restoration pictures.
Maybe actually what I'll do is I'll go out and take a new shot. Restoration friends down in Portland as well. They have actually this for several years now. They've been doing understory seeding trials, and they think they've found this like little sweet mix of species that does.
Oh, great!
Yeah.
Shout
Toby might be listening.
You're doing good.
Toby's, yeah, I copied Toby on everything. All right. I guess we're doing it already. So I think perhaps through Twitter, I can't remember now, but like couple months ago, I feel like you published this book.
Yeah.
Even though I knew about you before, you published this book called The Kid's Guide to Ecological Restoration.
Yeah.
I have it right here. Actually,
awesome.
I had my mouse on. It was a mouse pad for just a second.
I'm totally down with that.
I had my mouse on it. I don't know. It's more than a mouse pad. It's
Can I take that quote and put it in the back? More than a mouse pad. Okay, cool.
But I don't know. I had it set here because I wanted to refer to it, or I wanted to show you that I read it. I wanted to prove to you one of the street credibility that I read all 25 pages of it. But I did want to just chat with you. Obviously, I want to give you a chance to talk about it because there are few, if not zero kids' books about ecological restoration. So I just wanted to talk to you about what inspired it.
Yeah, I was looking for a birthday present actually for my nephew. He's 7. And, there's all these like nuclear fusion for babies, whatever. And I'm like, oh, there's got to be, it'd be cool if I could get him a book on ecological restoration for kids because then, it's a good book for him and he'll know what I do. And I was just flabbergasted when I went through Amazon and some of like the big book purveyors that there was no book on ecological restoration specifically targeted to children. There's tons of conservation biology or climate change, and those are all great. But restoration is a very specific thing, and it's one of the fastest growing industries on the planet. Our rate of land degradation and destruction is accelerating, so restoration is becoming more and more important. So it's this critical thing for kids to know about. So I was just blown away that a children's book didn't exist, and I kind of filed that away in the back of my head. I'm like, well, that'd be cool to fill that niche. And I don't know, I started kind of putting together some ideas of some of the components I thought were critical about the field and the practitioner of restoration for kids. And I started talking to a illustrator who's amazing, as you could tell. That book is like, the ideas are fine, but it's the pictures that just carry the book. They're so good. And I talked with the illustrator about some ideas, and that's how it came together. And it is still the only book targeted for kids on ecological restoration.
Yeah, it's dope.
It is dope. We're getting it translated into Spanish right now.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And is Daniela, she translating it? Are they translating?
Yeah, she's translating it. She's a Mexican grad student.
Okay. And then she's also the illustrator.
Yeah.
Nice. Because it is pretty succinct and fairly short and accessible. It took a lot of discipline, I think, to kind of shrink it down because it is pretty expansive. Was there topics that you thought about including but didn't make it in the book?
There were topics that I would have liked to go in a little more depth into, but I couldn't really figure out a way to do that for particular topics without kind of making it a much larger book or about something else. So this whole idea of like rehabilitating the soil and soil health, I think a notion that kids can get like soil can be healthy or not. But beyond that, it's actually the term soil health is in and of itself debated among soil scientists. So I wanted to get a little more into that because I think also an appreciation of the soil is something that's missing in a lot of children. They're like, ew, dirt, but it's like all life on Earth depends on like the top 5 centimeters of soil. So I wanted to go a little deeper in that, but it was just, I couldn't figure out a way to succinctly and interestingly do that. And the idea of rewilding as well was kind of very briefly touched upon there, but it's in sort of the research world. It's thought of kind of separately from ecological restoration, but it's this really important idea that kind of coincides with assisted migration, which for anyone that doesn't know is this idea that with climate change, the ideal climate envelope for species are going to move. So do we help those species move to track those envelopes, right? So as it gets warmer and warmer where I am, do I move some of the plant species 400 miles north where their ideal climate is now residing, essentially? And it's a very sort of practical response to climate change and things moving around, but it's also not practical in a lot of ways, because it's like, how do you do this? So, but I like kind of giving a splash of an idea for kids so that they're like, whoa, wait, what? people can move like buffalo. Let me find out more about
Mm-hmm.
that. And I had sort of ideas about the book and some literature, and I'm a mom, but I'm not like an educator of children. So I have an idea like what my kid is looking at and interested in now. She's 5, but it's an N of 1. So I brought some of what I had written and some ideas to people who work in 4-H and Cooperative Extension in the University of Arizona. And so these are people that work with children constantly, people from 5 to high schoolers, and know how they receive information and the best kinds of words and the topics they're interested in. So those folks in Cooperative Extension were really helpful in helping me narrow down ideas and terms and the way I talked about certain things to make it more accessible.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things I appreciated. Honestly, I like the concept of change. I think it's sort of a constant in my life. I'm trying to get in right relationship with change and letting go or releasing when I'm resisting change in so many ways, because I think it can really wind me up. Like I think it winds other people up. So I think change, that's a good thing. I think anyone, not just kids, but everyone should kind of get comfortable with. I was really surprised to see the concepts of passive versus active restoration too, and how restoration is kind of a third way apart from preservation and conservation, where that's like sort of the passive way, I guess, we restore things sometimes, is just to kind of like build a wall and just allow things to reassemble the way they want to or whatnot. But then the active restoration, which I think is pretty key to the interventionist sort of ways that ecologists now practice restoration.
Yeah. And I think it's also important for sort of kids or whoever's reading the book to know that there are different ways that these things can look. And as you said, a lot of kind of restoration is passive restoration. And it's important. And that's a critical way that we can help to mitigate some of the ways that we're destroying the planet. And so if kids go somewhere and they see a sign like, okay, closed to ATVs, closed to walking on this trail, maybe it would be a little easier for them to be like, oh, well, it's a bummer. We can't walk on this trail. But we know that if we walked in this area, we were destroying the plant community or making it harder for the plants to come back, or this endangered snail or whatever it is. And so that's passive restoration. And so I want to make sure people would know it if they saw it.
Yeah, and actually that's funny. The illustration to sort of characterize passive restoration is like two people who look like they're having the time of their life, like the funnest time ever. Look like they're having the funnest time of their life on an ATV. And they're like running over biocrust or something at the same time.
Well, it was interesting because we had to, for that picture specifically, we were like, okay, what can we show and make the least number of people feel bad about what they do? Because we didn't want to be like, people are walking, like hiking and ruining things. So we know in some places, like hikers who probably are like more environmentally savvy, maybe than the normal person, it's still destructive, right? Or like you go to the beach and you walk over beach dunes, like enjoy the beach and enjoy the beauty and ecology, but you just walked over a bunch of beach dunes and destroyed that. So we were like, well, ATVers, they enjoy it and that's great, but it's probably the smallest slice of people to insult. I don't know.
Yeah. And we'll talk about where to find it, where to get it later on, I think. I am kind of curious about, how do you see yourself in restoration?
Well, how I found myself to restoration, it's like a super long story. I wasn't like always into science or whatever, but essentially once I kind of realized that I was interested in science and plants, and once I started learning about the way science is done in terms of research, is I realized that I didn't want to spend my time, like my life, every day doing stuff that didn't have some sort of positive effect, which sounds a little corny, but I mean, you work a long time. And for me, I wanted to spend my time doing something that I felt was personally meaningful. And certainly sort of identifying or uncovering mysteries of science, that's important and all that. But being able to potentially help people make the world, even a small slice of it, a better place is very rewarding for me. So that's how I kind of ended up doing what I'm doing. And I really like a lot of aspects about working at a university. There's a ton of huge benefits, but I do cooperative extension, which is a pretty narrow component of working at some universities and land-grant universities. And specifically my job, it's a little different than typical faculty in that I do research and outreach. So my job, I'm essentially paid to like figure out how to do restoration better and then help people who do restoration or land management manage their land and do restoration. So it's like the best of both worlds. Cooperative extension is the best job ever for anyone listening. you definitely want to work in cooperative extension.
Yeah, I'm sort of close with the Washington State University Extension folks. They do some cool stuff. They grow like Christmas trees, but they also have like Pacific Madrone Common Garden studies. They do germination trials, like all this stuff. And then they do a bunch of like pathogen work.
There's all kinds of stuff for cooperative extension. It's not just, in fact, I'm only the second restoration cooperative extension person in the country. There will be a third very soon, but there's like cooperative extension does forests and crops and natural resources and invasive plants and all kinds of things.
Right. It depends, I guess, on where you're situated. That's a question I had, but maybe we'll just jump to it now. I'm just thinking about what are the connections or the crosswalk between your restoration practice and people's livelihoods.
Essentially, what I do is I talk to a lot of people, whether sort of informally, I'll go out and meet people, or formally, I'm a part of like tons of conservation boards and special interest groups. And I hear the needs of people. Like they essentially tell me directly, like, we're having problems with drought, which is everybody's problem. You know, we're having problems growing plants that my cows will eat with drought. We're having problems obtaining pollinator habitat for monarchs, things like that. And so when I hear their needs, then that's where I focus my restoration research. And I work almost exclusively in super arid systems, which are essentially the hardest ones to restore because everything is very slow growing because there's almost no water. And with no water, it's really hard to get plants going. So I work directly with stakeholders to make sure that my research questions are essentially motivated entirely by what people need. And so I work with ranchers, I work with farmers, I work with government, nonprofits, some tribes, some backyard gardeners, all kinds of people who are interested in maintaining and enhancing plant communities for the most part in very dry places.
Excellent. So I know I've read about your lab, the Gornish Lab. Can you tell me more about your investigations and the people involved? I guess it's not just you, but I assume you mobilize your students and other staff perhaps to
the students do all the work. They're the best. So my lab focuses, so we do ecological restoration research, and we specifically focus on approaches that are economically and logistically feasible. There's a lot of things you can do to enhance restoration outcomes that are extremely expensive, or you need specialized equipment or specialized certifications or whatever to employ them. And people just aren't going to do that. If something costs $4,000 an acre, even if it works 100% of the time, nobody's going to use that. So that's what the lab focuses on. And essentially the way we do our work is I have a bunch of different students, both grad students, mostly PhD students, and they all have their individual projects. And they, for the most part, run their experiments, and we work together to make sure that everything they're doing is very applied. I have some of my own experiments that I've started. For the most part, that data is collected either by my grad students or by my field tech. I have postdocs. So I have like this group of people that work with me, and mostly they don't work with me. Like they do all the work and I just kind of get the money for it and help them a little bit. But the students are just amazing and they get all the work done. And I guess I see my job in the lab mostly as sort of the delivery of the science. So once we figure out an approach that seems to work, how do you get that result in a form that's useful for someone out in the field? So I make science recommendations to managers, and I go out and I do lots and lots of public presentations. I do a couple at academic conferences that nobody remembers, but I go to a lot of management meetings and I give public workshops. I do seed ball workshops all over the state and write up briefs and blog posts and do all kinds of things. So that's mostly where I do it. So the research gets done mostly by my students and by the folks in the lab. And then I am largely responsible for taking the results of that work and transmitting it or getting into the hands of people who can actually use it.
Excellent. Yeah. And from what I've read about you, it seems like you're big on STEM, inclusion in STEM. Mm-hmm. So that's a challenge. I think the science it's not just specific to restoration ecology. Are there some recommendations you might have for greater inclusion and justice-centered efforts in labs and restoration in general?
Yeah, lots of ways. So one of the things that happens often in the university is that people have a lab and they say, okay, I want a student to work with me or a couple students. They can volunteer or I'll pay them or whatever. And that's really, really good for the students. It gives them experience. It enhances their resume. It makes them more likely that they can maybe go on to grad school or get a job. And one of the barriers to inclusion in this sense is a lot of these positions are unpaid. And that's because people don't have money for that. And that's fine. But if you are not offering money for people's time, then that means the only people who are going to be able to work in your lab for free are people that don't have to spend that time getting money for themselves. So you're reducing or eliminating a whole huge group of people who would be amazing and benefit a lot from working in your lab, for example, but you're not offering any money. And so these people have to work because they need money, or maybe they have a family and they have to go home immediately afterwards. So I think folks just need to be a little more aware of kind of what they're offering and try to do a little better job of making things available that would be attractive to a wider range of people, making sure that you advertise things. If you just advertise things on some science blogs or whatever, then the only people who are going to see the advertisements are people who are going to the science blogs. So maybe you want to be more careful about sort of opening up advertisements to a wider diversity of locations. One of the things that I try to do for STEM inclusion specifically is I started a program at the University of Arizona. It's called GALS, Girls on Outdoor Adventure for Leadership in Science. And it's a program that takes high school girls from underfunded schools, and we go into the backcountry. And I say I don't go into the backcountry with them because I'm like terribly old to these girls. It's really important to have near peer. So actually I hire female grad students and postdocs to take these girls because near peer is really important. And I'm 40 and these girls are like 15 and I'm like an old hag to them. That's cool. That's cool. Wow. But they go into the backcountry and they learn about local ecology, and they do a lot of leadership skill building, and they have lots of discussions, and we have women who work in different fields in science go out and visit them for a couple of hours and talk about their job. So the participants not only become active in science discussion in a very, very sort of encouraging environment, but they're also seeing women in positions of science. And it's not something where these women come in, they're like, this is what it's like to be a woman in science, because I don't actually think that's necessarily helpful. They're just looking at someone who is in science, and that person looks a little more like them, right? And the program is completely free. It's 100% free. And that's critical because there's actually quite a few in Tucson specifically. Actually, there's quite a few sort of these outdoor science programs, and they're amazing, but they're fairly expensive. And I understand you have to often charge money so that you have money that you can make the program happen. But if you have a bar of a cost, that means you only have a certain slice of the population that can partake in that program. And so our program is not only 100% free for participants, but all the things you would need for the program, transportation, food, camping gear, everything, it's all free. We either give it or we lend it to the participants. And what that means is that our participants, most of the people have never gone camping before. We have people who are not traditionally the types of participants that go to these programs. And so we're reaching a lot of new people who have historically been sort of excluded from STEM.
That's so cool. Yeah, I can imagine. I think that near peer strategy working really well. And I imagine it took a while to kind of get your feet under you with that sort of program. And then you've seen this evolution of the young people too now, perhaps like from young tweens or young teens to now they're older and doing things.
So I started the program in 2018, 2019. So we've had 3 years so far of the program. Some of our participants from the first and second year are going into college now, and some of them are actually at the U of A. And it's like, it's like professional young women. Like, I love it. It's amazing. And actually some of them, sometimes there's a lot of sort of high schools around Tucson that come to the U of A for programs. So I'll see some of the girls sometimes, and it's just like, they're amazing. And they're like, hey, Dr. Gornish, like, science is awesome. I'm like, yeah, like, some of these girls come in and they're like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. And then they leave the program and they're like, I want to do science. And that's not necessarily the goal. The goal is not to like get women into science. It's just to show these participants that science is a place for them and they can be just as good in science as boys if they want, right? When they come out of the program like a changed person, all of them are changed. The group goes in camping, they're all quiet and shy. And then they come back like braiding each other's hair and telling jokes and being like the kids that they are, right? But they're much more comfortable. It's like the best thing. So that the camping part of GALS is a week. And during the week, each participant conducts their own science experiment and they collect data. And then they come back from the camping trip and they spend a day with me on campus and we talk about science communication, and they each make a science poster. And then the following day, when their parents come to pick them up, we actually have a science presentation. Each girl talks about her poster and what she did. And it's a public presentation and it's amazing. And for most of these girls, this is the first time they're ever presenting a poster on science. And last year, all the girls presented. It was great. And then one of the parents asked, they raised their hand. They were like, what was the best thing about this program? And one girl, like the quietest girl, she's just like, it just made me know that I can do anything I want to do in my life. And I was like, I mean, literally nothing better than that. Literally. Like the girls just come back feeling empowered because they're in for a week, this like really insulated environment which is totally encouraging, and they're just like infused in science, and they realize how cool it is, and they come back loving it and feeling really empowered.
Congratulations. Yeah, it seems incredibly empowering. The communication, the transfer of like their experience to their parents. And just, I think that's what comes through in the kids guide as well. It seems like you're helping to enable kids to like see themselves, like imagine themselves in a way that they didn't before. So
yeah,
cool.
And that's kind of what I hope that the two small activities at the back of the book. A lot of times kids are like, "No, I'm just a kid, I can't do anything," and it's like, no, you can do a lot of things, and empowering kids now to know that they can have an active role in restoration or making the world a better place or whatever. These are two small activities, but it's like, that's important. I mean, making areas for pollinators is important, and revegetating native plants is important, and you can play around that. So here's 2 ways to do it, by yourself or with a parent or whatever. So that's specifically why we added those.
Yeah, and since you talked about it, and since I have the book right here, yeah, so 2 activities in the back of the book are 1, seed balls, totally incredible, and the other one is making a bee house. So yeah, seed balls are my favorite, and we were talking about seed balls a little bit earlier, and yeah, and we do some like summertime events. A lot of times we need an activity. I don't know why I didn't think about doing seed balls.
Seed
before.
balls are awesome. People love getting their hands dirty.
And tomorrow, actually, we're going to one in the International District of Seattle, and I'm actually offering seed. Like we have little seed packets, and then I just have loose seed there for people to kind of touch and then give away. But we were like, do we have an activity? And now we should probably do.
Now you got 2.
We should do seed balls. Do you have favorite, I guess, seed ball recipe? I call it a recipe. I don't know if you call it a recipe.
I call it a recipe.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Like you actually put it into play like on people's farms, but it is also just like
you can do it anywhere.
DIY. So what do you need to make seed ball?
All right. So seed balls are this super ancient technique that's supposed to enhance sort of the growth of whatever seed you put in there. And really the difference between naked seed, you got naked seed, you throw it out, might blow away, it might get eaten by something, it might bake in the sun and die, whatever. Seed balls are essentially a mix of seed, soil, or some other kind of nutrient like manure or compost, and a fire clay, which is the tackifier, the thing that makes it all stick together. You mix it all together, you add a little bit of water, and you can make these balls. And essentially, if you throw out the seed balls, the seed won't blow away. It's weighted down. Usually, the seeds are protected from being eaten by animals, and they're protected from desiccation stress. So if it happens to not rain for months and months, the seeds are protected inside the balls. And once it rains, the rain sort of melts away the fire clay, and you have this little sort of wet mound of your nutrients with the seeds inside them. And that wet mound, the nutrients can actually hold on to water better than most regular soils can. So those seeds, not only do they get wet from the rain, but that moisture from the precipitation hangs around for a little longer. So the seeds are more likely to germinate. And then they have a little bit of nutrients to help them get going. So my favorite recipe, it's definitely location specific, because in the Sonoran Desert, super, super, super dry, you don't need as much clay. So we have this like 1, 2, 3 thing. So 1 part seed, 2 parts clay, 3 parts nutrients. 1, 2, 3. And really you can use that anywhere. Once you get farther north up and you're in like Portland or Seattle or a place that it rains a lot, you might want to add a little more clay. So more like 1, 3, 3, or 1 part seed, 3 parts nutrients, 3 part clay, because you want the stuff to kind of stick around for a little while. But if you go on my website, on the outreach tab, I have an absurd about seed balls, because I'm kind of obsessed with it. I also have some videos about seed balls that I use my daughter's toys. They're campy, but useful. So
that's so cool. Yeah. I'm fascinated by them. I've done some. It's sort of meditative as well. If you do them by hand, I feel like you just kind of get into a little flow state.
Yes.
And it can be really relaxing. Clay. So I just need clay. And we have an art store. We have a favorite art store down the road. So I can probably just go grab it.
Fire clay, sometimes you can. So I can only find it at like, not specialty art stores, but like art stores, like not like Michael's.
Oh, okay.
But you can get, if you might be able to find powder clay, but I have worked with folks who couldn't get fire clay, and they've used like modeling clay. You can take a little bit and rub it with water, and modeling clay you can get anywhere. Or rub it with water and it'll harden. I work with people who were on some island and they couldn't get either of those things, and they used wet paper pulp, and that also worked.
Ooh, that's a good idea too. Okay,
yeah,
awesome.
So shred some paper, wet it, and that'll dry up.
No, we have our favorite. We have a very local art store. It's like down the road on like Market
Fire clay
Street.
is
I'll go check it out.
Stuff. It dries hard, but then if you put more water, it'll come apart again.
Yeah,
they've been around. They've been around since like 4 BC.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, there's
So it's like
documentation of people.
you said you used that term ancient, and I was like, I almost like guffawed, but I was like, oh yeah, no,
not like 200 years. Like, yeah. So there's written, the earliest I could find is people mixing seed with donkey manure and donkey bones, and that made the seed balls, and they threw them out. It was all for crops, but yeah, people have been mixing animal poop and animal bones with seeds for a long time.
I read about it years ago, probably, I can't remember. I had the book One Straw Revolution, right? I think you love that book, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
So that's one spot. I forget the author's name. Masanobu Fukuoka.
That book is actually what kind of popularized the use of seed balls outside of crops. Because seed balls have been used for crops forever, and now there's like, it's totally automated. Most crops have like machines devoted to pelletizing the seed for tomatoes or whatever. There's a very weird history with seed balls and restoration, but this book, One Straw Revolution, and he has a couple of other books, that's what kind of popularized it for guerrilla gardening and backyard gardening in like the 70s and 80s. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And I was briefly introduced to guerrilla gardening. It probably wasn't until college. Actually, I remember a field trip to Tacoma, and they were talking about there was like this burgeoning gardening network. I mean, right now development's kind of off the hook, but there was like lots of parcels that were just sitting there abandoned. And so people were just like taking over a space because that's what you do.
Yep.
when you need to grow food in the city. There is this case on the north end of the peninsula in Tacoma where the outer loop of Point Defiance, it's a big park. It's like a 700-acre park in the city. And you used to be able to drive all the way around. It's called 5 Mile Drive. Mm-hmm. They closed that outer loop just recently within the last couple of months because the end of the peninsula is falling off into the Puget Sound.
Oh, my.
This feeder bluff cliff is encroaching back onto the roadway, right? So I just looked at it. I don't know if I can divulge this. We rolled out there, we biked out there, and we jumped the fence. And the places where trees are, so there's like Douglas firs and Pacific madrone, right? So the best trees in the world are like holding the bluff in place, but it looks like to accommodate the view across over the water and over across to the other peninsulas and islands that you can see. I think they cut all the trees down. And so there's surface water erosion, and then there's probably sea level rise and like storm surge that like is compromising the bottom. I mean, it was premature, but my dream is actually to throw seed balls because I'm also interested in thinking about how to be efficient and effective in steep slope restoration. A few years ago, we had this one podcast episode with folks from Drone Seed who actually fly around with these huge storms.
One of my old students works with them now.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Which
and it's
one?
such like a small, Tiffany. Yeah.
I know Tiffany.
Tiffany helped me with my PhD.
Really?
Field work in Florida, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
but
great.
Drone Seed, they're doing some awesome stuff. And now there's this like little world of like drone-based seed restoration in the United States and elsewhere that like, it's crazy.
So I interviewed Matthew, a guy. Mm-hmm. He's like the big boss. Tiffany's local. And so I was just trying to turn them on to a drone restoration, doing germination trials with their pucks. They're a little secretive. I'm okay with that, but I just call it like a glorified seed ball. They're probably going to cringe when they hear that, but they're not listening anyway.
They're like pucks TM.
So and they're a little secretive because it's like proprietary information. I think Amazon is spying on them or whatever, but I kind of imagine what's in their pucks, and I feel like it's a glorified seed ball.
I mean, it is.
Yeah.
Because seed balls aren't anything particular, but yeah.
So they probably wouldn't drop them from drones in this space, but just doing the germination trials with this particular species.
It's something with trees, just now we're getting a little off the thing, but that's okay. I know people who have tested tree seeds in seed balls, and on the West, folks who have done pine seeds and acorns, doesn't seem to work. But in the Southeast, I know people who are doing longleaf pine restoration with seed balls, and it's working really well. So it's like definitely, it's very context dependent of the species and this whatever,
Yeah. Do you refer to it as seed enablement technology? Is that the fancy term for it? Is that a form of
seed enhancement technology?
Yep.
So seed balls are one kind of seed enhancement technology.
Okay.
Yeah. It falls under the purview of like seed-based seed enhancement technology, because there's also pelletizing, which is like you just cover the individual seeds and stuff. There's a whole little world of definitions.
No, it's okay. We'll drop these terms, and I imagine someone's listening to this podcast, and then they can pause and probably Google that, and hopefully people can go search for themselves. So, yeah, we talked about your lab, talked about gals. Anything else really holding your attention right now? Kind of inspiring you? Something you think that is holding restorationists back that we should be kind of tune our minds into?
Something I'm starting to see a lot more is this sort of like environmental depression type thing, that people more and more are being like, the world's on fire. There's nothing that I can do that will make a difference. And in one sense, like, you can use your reusable bag at the store while Jeff Bezos goes up and wastes, I don't know how much carbon dioxide to go up in his wild ride. And so what's the point? But I will say that there are things we can do. So I always go back to one of the biggest success stories, which is the ozone layer. So for any of your young podcast listeners, they probably don't know, in like the mid 80s, there was this hole in the ozone layer. We realized that the ozone layer, which protects us from the rays of the sun, there was a hole developing and it was getting bigger and it was hugely problematic. People got together and made the decision that they weren't going to buy certain types of products anymore. So aerosols that release CFCs, so like your mom's or your grandma's Aquanet. And it was people who made the decision they weren't going to buy it. And then businesses responded to that. They were like, oh, people aren't buying this version of Aquanet. We're going to modify how the products we're going to provide for people. So right now, the ozone layer is essentially undamaged. So I think that sort of environmental depression, which is real and understandable, can sometimes keep people from doing small things that become big things. And so I constantly just try to focus. I give a lot of talks about like sort of climate change, and often my talks are they're a pretty big bummer. I don't usually say anything that people don't know, but I always try to put something in there to remind people that we have capacity, even at very, very small scale. Like I do gardening and my backyard isn't very big, but now there's some habitat for a couple birds and it's important to those birds. Okay. There's lots of birds elsewhere, and so, focusing on that scale and then like, voting with your wallet, deciding what you're going to buy and what you're going to do can make a big difference. So I would just always try to encourage people to not get so bummed out about the state of the world that they should just give up. We have the capacity collectively to make good change.
That's a great takeaway. Thanks for that. Yeah, I needed that today, honestly. I think everyone does for sure. Like what you're doing, like in the gals and in the book too, just showing young people at least that there's heroes and there's success stories. It's very apparent. There's no secrets about biodiversity loss and climate disruption, how that's impacting people or theoretically or just like really actually like affecting people.
It's affecting your son. He's got to stay inside today because it's 9 degrees.
He's like,
what does he think that's a product of? I mean, it's,
He's actually upstairs like in the hot box because I had to turn the AC off because it's so noisy. It was interfering with the studio quality sound
like,
of the
who's
podcast.
This person you're talking to? No, you just choose the thing you want to work on and focus on that. And when people are like, what can I do? I'm like, choose one thing. And then every 3 months, like think if you can choose another thing. You really like meat? Okay, don't become a vegetarian. Like start bringing your own bags or whatever. There's just little tiny things and behaviors can modify outcomes. I'm not yet willing to just let the world go to shit or continue going to shit because I got a young kid,
Right.
It's important for me and I don't want her to grow up in a crap hole. So just doing whatever I can and trying to teach her the same.
A lot of restorationists are on the kind of the front lines, witnessing a lot of change and loss. Is there anything you do to keep yourself balanced besides free hugs from them?
I mean, restoration ecologists more than anyone else, I think, know what's going on the front lines. They see it, but they also see the small successes. You have to take that and try to parlay that into larger successes. Like, why did this work here? And we can make it work somewhere else. And especially the people who work around here. I mean, there's like so little rain. In 2020, there was like literally no rain. Almost everything died, but not everything died. And why didn't those things die? And so grabbing on these like little tiny gems of possible positive things and trying to parlay that into practices or approaches for later, that's what you have to do.
Nice. Good. For a minute, I lived in Southern California and like Southern LA, and like 1 year on the reserves, there was like, we got like 2 inches of rain. And I was like, okay, this is how life is. And then next year we had 20 inches of rain, like 10 times the amount.
California's a crazy place.
Yeah, like so much fennel and black mustard, we couldn't even, like that's 10 feet tall that we couldn't keep a handle on. I kind of vaguely remember. Contrary to like this year now back in the Pacific Northwest where it like just stopped raining like a couple weeks ago. So weird.
Yeah.
Super weird.
We're getting pretty good rain this summer, which is nice. but it's still not making up for previous years. It's problematic. Right. But whatever. Hopefully we'll get good rain this year. It'll get some stuff going and just try to be positive, man. It's hard sometimes, but.
There's a question I ask everyone before they leave the podcast, and it's about what their favorite tree is. I don't know if it's the most appropriate question given like your ecosystem. You don't have to pick a tree. You could pick something else.
It doesn't have anything to do. So my favorite trees are magnolias. I did my PhD in Florida, and magnolias are just the most beautiful. Yeah. They're beautiful without flowers. I mean, those leaves are just crazy, and they're so like tropical, like so glossy. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And when they're flowering, it's just crazy. And it's so weird because in my mind, magnolias are this like southeastern tree. It's got to be hot and whatever. But as they kind of moved up the East Coast, they would take magnolia trees with them or the seeds and plant them to remind them of like home or something. So you can be in like Arlington, Virginia, and there's huge magnolias and there's snow and you're like, what is this thing doing here? But so I don't know, magnolias are pretty cool. Definitely.
Those are great.
We'll say grasses and forbs are way cooler than trees. Grasses and forbs, baby.
Yeah, I'm tinkering with this seed mix. Not a mix, actually. I bought all the species separately. It's like kind of very specific to like the Gary Oak ecosystem. So like all those species that you generally see in those prairies, grasses and forbs. Learning it's a whole new world.
You need them. They need trees and the trees need them.
That's cool. Okay. Do you want to let people know how to find the book and follow your work?
Yeah. So the book you can find on Amazon. There's a couple of local stores in Tucson, or they can contact me if they want to know about non-Amazon locations. And folks can go to my lab webpage, which is GornishLab.com, and they can learn about the research if they want. But I have an outreach tab on there, and it's got tons of information. And I'm RestoreCal on Twitter and Instagram. And I post a lot of fun stuff.
Excellent. All right. Yeah, I'll put those links in the show notes. People, I think, hopefully know where to find those. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Really great to meet you.
Yeah, this was awesome.
Thanks for joining me again for another episode of Tree Hugger Podcast. I'm Michael Yadrick. Please check the show description for information about Dr. Elies Gornish, where you can find out more about her at her website. It takes a community to keep the podcast going. I am totally independent, and you can donate to help cover the small overhead costs for the show. I'm at myadrick at PayPal and Venmo, and then Cash App. My handle is Michael Yadrick Jr. The archive of this episode lives online at treehuggerpod.com. Tree Hugger Podcast is on social media at Tree Hugger Pod, so feel free to point people in our direction. Subscribe, rate, and review the show, please, on whichever podcast platform you enjoy listening to. It helps people find the show. Or tell a friend about the show. Thanks for hanging out. See you in the woods.
If I drop a bunch of F-bombs, we can
that's
that
totally
out.
fine. We'll
but
just
like tweeting birds or something over it.
Yeah.
The sound of a seed ball melting.
That's a good auditory experience. I never thought about it. It's like a more visual.
It's a whole business venture instead of like, forest sounds for people to go to sleep, for ecologists to go to sleep. It's just the sound of like a seed ball melting.
Right. Can you insert those little probe in there? You can do. It's like alpha waves or something. Huh.
You have like just a tiny little mic that you like just hold next to it.
It is.
With a boom
for
mic.
like in the 105 degree weather. I'm sure it goes pretty fast. Cool.